Security awareness. Now, there's an old saying, ignorance is bliss. Now, although in certain contexts that saying holds true, we find that in most areas of business, it's simply not true. Now, security awareness is definitely one of those areas. What we don't know can and will be used against us. The key to security is user awareness. In this nugget, we're going to start out with a primer, and as in most cases, that primer is going to set the stage for further discussions within this nugget. Then we're going to talk about techniques that we can use to raise security awareness in our organizations. And we're going to end up with a look at ways to measure the effectiveness of our security awareness program. All right, let's jump right into that primer. Now, when we start out this primer, first I want to have kind of a big picture, general look at what we're talking about. First of all, I'm going to draw out a network here. We're going to start with the local area network, and then we're going to draw the usual security perimeter that you're going to find there, and that's going to be a firewall complete with a DMZ. This is where we're going to put our servers that we want to be accessed by the outside, and this is where we're going to put things that we don't want anybody from the outside to access, right? From that point, you're going to have a router, and that router is going to have a connection into that great public network we call the internet. Now, you can see that our security is kind of set on a perimeter basis surrounding our treasure here, which is the local area network. So that gives you an idea that the attackers are out here. So when we talk about security awareness, you're probably thinking, well, you know what? We need to be aware of what these people are doing and how they're doing it. Nope, not the right answer. So let's take another approach. Well, you've heard that there are employees that actually attack their own company, right? So what if the attacker existed on this trusted side of the network? Because remember, on this firewall, we're going to divide the network from the untrusted portion out here to the trusted portion, which is what we're going to find on the back end there, right next to our important servers, things of that sort, important data. Well, what if the attacker was here? Oh, well, then in that instance, what we need is we need a firewall right here to go ahead and segregate portions of our local area network so that we can make sure that, you know, one side can't access the other and so on and so forth. So is that what we mean by security awareness? No, that's not it either. This is what we're talking about. You know, when we hear about different wars and different fighting and skirmishes throughout the world, you hear of the idea of friendly fire. The idea there is that we have somebody that we consider on our side that fires over, and it causes some type of casualty to somebody else that we consider to be on our side. Well, the same thing holds true here when we're talking about network security. You have the idea of friendly fire causing casualties, but in this case, we're talking about data casualties. In other words, if I have a server out here, it may be an instance of a user, N1 here, not securing completely the access to that server one so somebody else like an attacker can follow, whether that attacker's inside or outside, internal or external. So we're talking about somebody who doesn't have a malicious intent, but by not following a specific policy or a specific standard has opened the gate for somebody else to take advantage of that. And so now we can see where the emphasis is going to be when we talk about our security awareness program. I'm going to just label that SAP. But our security awareness program is going to try to make sure that this friendly fire doesn't occur. So in fact, let me give you an official objective if I can here. We are looking to go ahead and identify a couple of things. The first thing is we want to go ahead and identify threats. The second is we want to go ahead and identify possible vulnerabilities. And then what we want to do after the identification phase is we want to make sure that we react appropriately. Now, that's where it's going to be broad-based, and it's going to differ depending on the individual network. When we talk about reacting appropriately, we're talking here about, you know, who do we need to contact? What actions do we need to perform? And in some cases, we can talk about that on an individual basis. In others, we may be talking about that in a group basis. It could even be as large as the entire organization. But the main thing you want to draw out of this as far as the objective is that we want to be able to readily ID threats and vulnerabilities so that we can react appropriately. Now here we're going to talk about requirements of, again, that security awareness program. These requirements are going to be, first of all, that we have clear definitions, and these definitions are going to be, again, for these threats and vulnerabilities. So let me draw that out. Clear definitions, make that an E, and you also want to have clear directives, kind of what we said a minute ago. Once we have those clear definitions so we can identify here, the directives are, what do we do now? Where do we go? What action do we take? Part of that action is going to be the idea of notification. And you can't be too granular on this. When you talk about notification, we need to understand and have in writing who we need to call or contact, how we need to contact them, because that could be by phone, by pager, by runner if it has to be, right? And then what information needs to be relayed to those individuals so that we can make sure that we're doing what? We're reacting appropriately. So these are the requirements, and beyond those clear definitions, you also have a requirement of top-down support. This is when we're talking about getting the support of upper layer management. And believe me, this is key. If you don't have that top level support, then there's no reason in going forward with the security awareness program. So when we talk about support, what is it we're talking about? Well, right off the bat, you're probably thinking we're talking about money, and indeed we are. Another thing we're going to talk about is time to make sure we can roll this program out in an effective manner. And the other thing is we need to make sure that the priority is set straight. In other words, this idea of the security awareness program is high on that chart because remember, it's all about prioritization when you're talking about management. If we have some functionality that needs to be taken care of for the security awareness program, but then they have another functionality that needs to take care of for program X, which one is going to get the precedence or that priority? We need to make sure of that ahead of time. And then the last and most important thing that you're going to get out of top-level management is the idea of leading by example. In other words, do as I do, not just as I say, because as employees see that, or in any relationship, when you have followers and leaders, as the followers see that the leaders are leading by example, then they're going to more readily follow that example. All right, now the last requirement I'm going to list here is the fact that, and this is going to be a not, where everything else was something that we needed, this is something we don't need, and it's very important. We cannot affect production. Remember that we're in the business to be in business. In other words, whatever we are creating, a product or a service, to bring in money to that organization, that cannot be preempted by the idea of the security awareness program. There's always that fine line between security and then making money in a business. And you have to find that, and you have to find it pretty readily and make sure that you stick to that line once you define it. Now, up to this point, I've emphasized the importance of this top-down support, but you can see down here I have the term key, as in something is key, right? Well, here we're going to talk about what is the key to measuring the success of this program. And the key measurement there is going to be, have you created an organization that is security conscious in every aspect of that organization, every part? So when we talk about every part, we're talking about the people in that organization. Anybody that comes in contact with our data, are they aware of their responsibilities on how to protect and care for that data? Because if they're not, guess what? We've just found our weakest link within our chain, and it's something that we need to go ahead and fix, all right? Now, how do we make everyone aware? We're going to talk about within this nugget, but we also need to understand that more than being aware, you also have to make sure that they care. Two ways to do this, and this is motivation in any aspect of life, right? One is that you can have positive reinforcement. The other is going to be negative reinforcement. Obviously, what we would like in an optimal world is to have this positive reinforcement always work, but it's not going to be true in every aspect of business, and it's the same here. Sometimes you're going to have to use this negative reinforcement, and that's when you're going to rely on this top-down support so that users know that if they don't adhere to the policies that you set forward within securing the data, that there will be an answer that they have to come up with to this top-level management. Because, again, if they just have to answer to you, then they might not care about that, right? And so the thing that you can use to remember it here, this whole idea of this key measurement, is that buy-in is better than coercion. Now we're going to concentrate on answering the question, and that question is going to be, how do we raise awareness of our security awareness program? And here we go. I doubled up on the awareness there. First thing we're going to start off with is just talking about security policy. The reason I'm going to take this document, because that's what it is, just a document, first off is because I wanted to underscore the importance of the security policy. I've mentioned it in other nuggets. I just want to reiterate here. This is the #1 document that you're going to have within your organization for defining what your expectations are as far as security, and then also defining responsibilities, again, of those individual users. And remember, that's our primary objective here, is to make sure that that user has an awareness of their responsibilities and how their actions are going to affect whatever happens to the security of our data inside that local area network, if you will. But really, it's throughout anywhere that we have our data. All right, so that security policy is a document. We need to make sure that every user reads it. That's the first thing we're going to have to talk about. So part of our awareness program is, #1, create the document. #2, distribute that document to everybody. And then #3, what we're going to do that might be different here than the normal security policies is that we're going to require a signature. And the reason for that is this is what's going to give us our teeth. When we talk about the enforcement of this policy, we can revert back to the signature and say, okay, upper level management, we have this individual that we know was aware of the policy, we have a signature here, but still didn't adhere to it. What are we going to do now? All right, that's a security policy. But let's talk specifically on the raising of this awareness. One thing we can do is we can advertise. So through advertising, we can make sure that we get to every corner of our network and that every user within our organization understands, again, those responsibilities. We're going to talk about them in groups. First of all, about things that can occur daily, others that can occur periodically but not daily, and then a special category down here. All right, start now with the dailies. The first thing we're going to talk about is trying to make sure that this awareness is everywhere. Everywhere our user looks, they see this. So posters on the walls are going to give us that effect, right? As this individual walks through the hallways of the work environment, they can look around and say, hey, there's a poster, and guess what? Security is important again. There's another poster. It says what I should do in certain situations on down the line. So that's going to be an effective tool that's not going to cost that much money and really is a way of getting to everybody, because not everybody, as far as these users, is going to have a computer system. And most security awareness programs rely on a computer system or access to mail, some type of newsletter or something like that. But hold on, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go ahead and stay back here. First daily that we wanted to list was the posters. Another is going to be, we're going to stay with that wall theme, if you will. We're going to have an area of recognition. This is where we're going to identify top performers within some security area and say, hey, you know what, for the month of January, this individual did X, Y, and Z, and you know what, here's their picture. Anytime we have recognition, people want to receive recognition, especially in the workplace. So this is a good avenue that we can set up so that they try to, by adhering to these policies and understanding them, get themselves up on this board. All right, beyond that, now we're going to talk about computer type of usage. Whenever we log into a computer, we can have a login banner, and that login banner can again be a reminder of the importance of security. It can be a tip about security. It could be some kind of question and answer thing. Either way, we're advertising and getting the word out there. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is screensavers. Again, within computers, this is the idea of having screensavers that are going to just flash up some type of security blurb, and as an individual comes back to their computer, there it is right in front of them. As somebody crosses by their computer, there it is. Another effective way to keep it in the minds of the individuals constantly throughout the workday. Now let's move out of the dailies and get into more of the periodic type of advertising. The first thing I'm going to list here, and I've mentioned it a little bit before, is the idea of a newsletter. Now when I talk about a newsletter, I'm talking about a hard copy document that can be delivered through the company mail system, something of that sort, again, to every individual within the company. Now at this point you might be saying, well, hold on a little bit. What you have up here probably doesn't cost as much money because it doesn't have to be individual to every user, and in the instances that it is, maybe like the screensaver, it doesn't cost as much. But if you want a monthly newsletter, or even bi-weekly, coming out and saying, hey, here's the latest about security within our organization, that's going to cost money for the product. It's also going to cost money for the time of some individuals to actively make sure they have the content and the delivery set up, things of that sort. Why would I do that? Well, this is where we revert back to our idea of risk analysis. In risk analysis, we need to say, okay, as far as security, this ounce of prevention here, is it going to be a cost savings as far as comparison to the pound of cure? And if it is, then maybe these dollars are going to be considered well spent. That's the idea of a newsletter. Another thing that's going to cost a little bit less because it's an electronic type of transfer is maybe an email going out in the form of a bulletin. And again, you can keep that same schedule as you would have with this newsletter, and maybe it'll cost you a little bit less. Whichever you find most effective within your organization. But the same thing, you can sit there and advertise, here's what's going on in our organization in reference to security. All right, last category we have as far as advertising, down here at the special. This is where we can have a campaign or a competition. Now in this competition we could say, if you find some security awareness things that you should not do or things that you should do, either way, examples of security awareness, you bring those to our attention. Whoever tallies up the most within a given time period gets one free day off of work, anything of that sort, and you can get a lot of involvement and a lot of a lot of people pumped up about what you're trying to have happen. So that's a competition. Another, as far as a special category, could be a security dedicated website. On this security website is a good source for anybody to log in and brush up on the information. Remember we talked about the security policy earlier. Well, this is one thing you'll have on the website, the security policy. Maybe you'll also have some question and answer areas for those general questions that you seem to get all the time, an area for tips about how you can fulfill your responsibilities towards security or how you can better understand them, have a glossary about security terms, ideas, definitions, things of that sort, have how-to tutorials, and probably the most important is information on viruses. It seems that when we talk about the user base and they talk about security awareness, this is one of the first things they think about. Hey, you know, there's viruses out there. How do I prevent them from getting onto my machine? Do I have the latest antivirus? All of this stuff. That kind of information really gets people juiced about, hey, what are we doing? We're actively fighting some kind of attack. Let me see, just like we're in wars today, let me see the frontline footage. Let's talk about those viruses. So do that as well. All right, and the last thing we're going to talk about here within Special is an idea that is used in some of the larger companies, and that's going to be a security awareness day. You know, claim it a holiday. Say, hey, in this day, we're just going to go with a blitz of information on you. You may even incorporate that competition that we talked about earlier in the security awareness day. Keep in mind that these are just ideas to advertise. You can come up with many others of your own, or you may just use a couple of these, whatever works in your environment. So advertising is one way to raise that awareness. I want to let you know of another one, and that's going to be in the form of training. We're going to break that out into two categories. The training you receive as part of the hiring process, and then the periodical training that you're going to get after you're an employee. Here we go. Talking about the hiring first of all. Understand that this is going to be in the realm of HR. They kind of set up the hoops that you need to go through for orientation into that company. Now, orientation can take the form of many things. It can be as simple as here's a building diagram, here's how the parking lot works. Here is, again, our advice as far as data security in the form of a security policy. Here is the policy on, you know, the cafeteria within the organization, whatever it may be. Obviously, the important thing to us here is this security policy. What we want to happen is we want to make sure that individuals are going to read that policy and at the same time understand that policy, and we're going to have to require some type of signature so that we're sure that this took place. First of all, as far as the reading, you can make that an individual effort, but it's going to be harder that way. Maybe you can make it a group effort and say, okay, we're going to have a group training or orientation, then we're going to highlight the individual areas of the security policy, the responsibilities that pertain to this certain group, because in this group we have all the people that were hired to be executive assistants. This is what it means to you as far as the security policy. That way you have somebody there to actively answer questions as you're going over these areas. And again, you want to make sure that they adhere to it, so you want to give them ways and ideas to do that. And then the last thing, require this signature. Another thing you want to provide on this hiring process is the idea of, again, management coming through and showing their support. And they can do that in the form of a letter. A letter from the CEO would be an example that says, this is what the security policy means to our organization. This is how important it is, and you need to adhere to it. Signed, yours, and there's the CEO's name and signature. That kind of thing goes a long way in showing the support. Another piece that you can hand out here within the hiring process is an awareness handbook. And within this awareness handbook, we're just going to go over the basics, kind of a quick guide that somebody can use to say, you know, how do I accomplish the objectives of the security awareness program? We talked about those before, and that was one, the identification of threats and vulnerabilities, and then two, understanding the appropriate reaction that I should take in the case of a certain incident. So we're just going to have the basics on identification and how we react. That's our awareness handbook. All right, after that, we get done with the hiring process. We want some kind of periodic reminder, making sure that everybody keeps things in mind as they should. Well, the first one we're going to talk about is going to be a refresher training on that security policy. As far as when you want to have that training, really up to you. Again, it can be an annual type of training. It can be semi-annual, whatever you feel the requirement is within your organization. You can even differ the time frame depending on the type of job you're doing. If you are a system administrator within the organization, maybe you need to go more often than, again, those executive secretaries. Or maybe that's flipped exactly the opposite way. Again, it depends on your organization. All right, beyond that refresher training, how about performance reviews? We all go through those. You're going to get with your supervisor and they're going to say, okay, Emilio, this is what you've done through this period of time. These are the good things. These are the bad things. This is the area that maybe you can improve on. Well, we just want an area in there that talks about our security awareness program. Same thing as we just said. This is what you've done. This is what you could do better. And just, get a conversation going so that we understand more about what they understand about the program. The next recommendation I'm going to offer as far as periodic training is going to be the idea of professional training. Now, when I talk about professional training, I'm talking about formal, structured courses that can result in certification sometimes, but not always. Some people think when you talk about professional training, it's always in line with certification, but it's not. It's really, again, getting that awareness out there and understanding of individuals' responsibilities within an organization. Now, that training can happen as an internal type of entity. So you have maybe people in your system administration group saying, here's how we develop security. This is why we have requirements for passwords, things of that sort. You have the idea of internal, but you also can lean on external types of training. A good example of this is going to be the SANS organization or the SANS Institute. Now, SANS stands for System Admin, that's the S, A for Audit, N for Network, and then S for Security, and it's an institute. It was established in 1989, so it's been around for a good amount of time. And the idea behind this SANS Institute is it wanted to serve as a trusted source for computer security training, certification, and research. In fact, let me take you out to the website so you're familiar with it. We see it here. Here's SANS. And I want to focus on, here we go, the About SANS area. Because what they're going to show you here is the different programs that are involved in their group. Programs of the SANS Institute. You see it here, information security training, kind of what we just talked about, 400 multi-day courses. That's quite a few, right? You also have information that's going to go out on a regular basis about, here you go, step-by-step guides on how to do things. Information security room. They're going to have original research papers that are going to say, here's what's happening today in the world of security. Maybe here's how it applies to your organization, maybe not. But if you read these papers, you can find out. There are a myriad of other programs as well. Just wanted to give you a site that you could go to so you could find this type of information. All right. So far in this nugget, we've gone over the primer, first of all, so that we can set the stage for our conversations. Now we just went over ideas of raising awareness. And the last area we're going to cover is measurement. How are we going to measure the effectiveness of these measures that we're putting out there for raising awareness and making sure that every individual within our organization knows their responsibilities and how to carry out those responsibilities? So let's look at that measuring. In this section, we're going to look at two measurement activities. The first one we're going to talk about is the idea of an audit. Now, the objective of an audit, or the use of an audit, is to stand as a review and examination of system records and activities to do a number of things, and we're going to look at each of those individually. But understand that this review and examination, this can be, in most cases, done by an independent organization, but in some special cases, it can also be done by the individual organization themselves. In other words, your own IT department. Either way, you want that done. All right, let's talk about what it's going to be looking at. First of all, it's going to try to determine the adequacy of system controls. Now, when we talk about system controls, these are ways of mitigating risk, or trying to make sure that we're not going to suffer from a vulnerability, things of that sort. So we need to measure how we are ensuring security, one aspect of an audit. The next is going to be to ensure compliance. Now, when we say ensure compliance, we're talking about that security policy as well, that SP. We're saying let's make sure that the individual users are complying with those standards. If they're not, we have that signature. We need to up the training. We need to get management involved, whatever the case may be. The next thing we're trying to do here is we're going to detect something, and the detection we're looking for is to detect vulnerabilities within our networked environment, our current environment. The reason we do that is we want to see if anything was left hanging in the wind. Is there anything we need to fix? And then the last thing is we're going to recommend changes. Now, those changes could be as an outcome of finding a vulnerability and saying, hey, this is what we need to do to fix a current problem. Or it may simply be an improvement to the way we're doing things today. You know, it works, but you could do it a little bit better, cost a little bit less money, less intensive on as far as bandwidth, or the requirements of equipment, things of that sort. So these are the things that we're going to do in an audit, and these audits should be done on a periodic basis, and they should be done regularly and by professionals. It's not a matter of some individual being able to say, oh yeah, you know what, I read a little bit about an audit, why don't I go ahead and try that? They have to be security-minded professionals to make sure that this audit is going to be worth the time and effort that we put into it. All right, time to look at our second and last measurement activity that we're going to cover within this nugget. And that's going to be the idea of testing. And we're going to test the measures that we've taken so far. Here we go. When we talk about test, it's an authorized penetration attempt. So what we're saying is we're going to have an individual out here and we're going to say, you know what, do your best to go ahead and find the vulnerabilities within our network and find areas that we can improve. Again, we're talking about those improvements, or just simply fix because it's completely broken. Find those areas for us, give us a report on it, and let's move forward. The ways we can do that, I'm going to list two. First of all, we're going to talk about social engineering. It's really a non-technical way of penetrating your network. And then we're going to look at the technical side and talk about different tools that are available, just a couple. All right, starting with social engineering up here. I'm going to give you an example of what we're talking about. Again, non-technical, we can have an attacker here, and all they really need is a phone. And in that phone, they can say, okay, I'm going to call over here to an individual user within the network. And as I call over there, I'm going to identify myself as part of the help desk within that organization. Yep, that's line number one. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, you know what, we're doing some maintenance on the system, and I need to know your password so I can verify it with our system records. And then this individual, if they are security aware, is going to say, you know what, within my policy it says the help desk will never call me for my password. So I'm not going to give it out, number one. Number two, once I've notified or identified that vulnerability or that attempted a vulnerability, I need to understand how to react appropriately. Who am I going to call? Well, I'm going to call the real help desk and say, I just got this weird phone call. This is the attempt of social engineering. This is what we're hoping happens. But in a lot of cases, guess what? Not security aware yet, and they simply say, oh, my password? Yeah, here it is. I'm kind of in a rush. Can I just give it to you real quick? And they move on down. Now this individual has access into one of our systems. There are many other ways that you will see social engineering take effect within networks, but this is just one to give you an example. All right, and the last thing I want to talk about is the technical side of this testing, where you have automated tools. First one can be the idea of using a password cracker. This is going to be a tool that can automatically look into your network, certain parts of your network, find a bank of passwords, and then try to crack those passwords. This is where they're going to use things like a dictionary attack, and they're going to say, okay, I'm going to test common words, or even deviations off of common words, changing an E to a 3, a I to a 1, things of that sort, and see if I can get these passwords. It'll generate a report for you and say, hey, you've got some work to do in most cases. Another idea of a tool here is an OS fingerprinter. Within that OS fingerprinting, you have the idea of a remote system being able to start up a conversation. Let me see here. I'm going to bring up this remote system. Start up a conversation with some devices within your network, and dependent on the response that you get back, even if it's not a setup of a connection, but that reject even, the way it's formatted is going to say, you know what, I know that that's a Windows box, I know that it's running XP, I know, and then the list goes on. This is OS fingerprinting. Beyond that, there's the example of a war dialer. In your network, you should probably have a statement that says, I don't want any modems connected to computers, right? Well, that modem that's connected to that PC for that individual user because he wants to go home and do some work is a hole within your network security. If that attacker can find that hole as well, they can take advantage of that. This war dialer is going to go through your whole bank of phone numbers individually and try them out. And as it gets an identification of a modem tone, it goes ahead and says, hey, there's a modem there, and it gives you that report. There are so many other tools. I just wanted to list a couple of them so you get the idea of the types of things that we're talking about. We started this nugget with a primer, and within that primer, we went ahead and we stated the objectives and the requirements of a security awareness program, and we even listed the key to success. We said, you need to measure and find out, have you created a security-conscious environment throughout your organization, all your employees? From there, we talked about ways that we can raise awareness. Number one, we talked about the importance of a security policy. After that, we looked at examples of ways to advertise the program, and then also forms of training so that we can make sure that our employees are security aware. Then when we talked about measurement or measurement actions, we listed the audit and active testing as ways that we can measure the success of our program. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.